haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The galaxy had forgotten silence. Once, the stars of the Eldar Empire burned with the arrogance of gods, their light spilling across 1,000,000 worlds like the breath of creation itself. But now, that brilliance flickered, dimmed by the weight of decadence, by centuries of unbroken triumph. Between the jewel spires of their dominion, pleasure had become purpose, and art had become indulgence. Entire civilizations danced to the rhythm of desire, and no one saw that their music was echoing into the void. The stars watched as the empire, in its perfection, began to rot from within. They say every empire dreams of eternity before it dies. The Eldar dreamed louder than any before them, their dreams so vast they bled into the warp itself. In their temples of glass and gold, they sang songs that made reality tremble. Their minds reached across galaxies, shaping worlds like clay, sculpting moons into monuments. But what they could not master was themselves. Their souls grew swollen, bloated with sensation and pride. They had become as gods, yet gods without restraint. And where restraint is lost, ruin begins its patient work. Among them walked one who remembered the old codes. When beauty was tempered by meaning, when silence was sacred. He moved through the shining avenues of the capital world, his steps echoing faintly beneath towers carved from living crystal. His name had long been forgotten by mortals, spoken now only in the whispering halls of Comara. But once he had been called Liren Val. His eyes, once bright with wonder, now reflected only the fading light of a dying empire. He had lived through ages where thought could sculpt matter and emotion could birth storms, yet all his mastery could not quiet the disquiet within him. He passed beneath hovering banners woven from light itself, each bearing the sigils of noble houses. Houses now consumed by rivalry and obsession. He saw the people reveling draped in silks that shimmered with the hues of distant suns. Their laughter rose like incense, their pleasure unending, their spirits untouched by the creeping dread that filled the spaces between the stars. To them, eternity was their birthright. To him, it had become a sentence. A great procession wound through the streets, a festival of sensation, the 10th such that cycle. Perfumed winds carried the cries of dancers whose bodies shimmered with psychotropic pigments. On towering platforms, priests of the pleasure cult preached indulgence as virtue. The soul, one declared, is the greatest canvas. To feel without limit is to live beyond mortality. The crowd roared in approval, their voices merging into a chorus that shook the air. Liren watched from the edge, unseen, unmoved. He could feel it. The trembling beneath the surface of their joy, the pulse of something vast and hungry gathering beyond perception. The warp, once a tranquil sea of thought and dream, now boiled with unseen colour. It was listening. It was learning. That night, he stood at the balcony of his tower, gazing into the black ocean of space. Stars glimmered like fading embers. In the distance, the heart worlds glowed faintly, veiled in auroras of psychic light. He remembered when that glow was pure, when it had sung of creation, not corruption. The laughter of the festival still carried through the void, faint but persistent. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he could almost hear another sound beneath it, a low, deep murmur like breath drawn through water. The warp was whispering. It spoke in echoes, in shapes, in the promise of pleasure eternal. And yet, there was sorrow in that promise, as if the universe itself mourned what was coming. He turned away, seeking solace in the quiet of his chambers. The walls pulsed faintly with organic light, alive with memory. Each room of his home had been designed to respond to emotion, a living architecture that felt and remembered. But lately, it had begun to hum with unease. When he dreamed, the walls changed colour on their own, deepening into bruised purples and sickly golds. He had asked the architects to cleanse its patterning, but even they had noticed it. The resonance, the dissonant note that had entered their psychic harmony. Something was bleeding into reality, something vast enough to stain it. He poured himself a cup of amasec distilled from the moons of Ishakal, its surface glimmering like molten amber. He drank slowly, feeling the warmth spread through him, though it could not touch the cold in his chest. Outside, the revelry grew louder, 1,000 voices reaching into the heavens. He wondered if they understood what their joy was feeding. Perhaps they did not care. Perhaps no one ever does, until the price is due. He thought of the seers, the few who still dared to speak of consequence. Most had been silenced, their warnings mocked as superstition. But one had come to him recently, veiled in starlight and fear. Her voice had trembled as she spoke. "There is something forming beyond the veil," she said. "A reflection of us, made of our desire. It watches, it waits. If we continue, it will be born, and it will devour everything we are." Lirin had dismissed her then, though her words had clung to his mind like smoke. Now, in the loneliness of his tower, he heard her again. The warp murmured in the rhythm of her voice, as though it too remembered her prophecy. Far below, the great spires shimmered, pulsing with psychic energy. He saw ships rising toward the heavens, sleek and proud, envoys of an empire that believed itself immortal. He knew their captains. He had sat with them, debated philosophy and art. They had laughed at death, called it a relic of lesser beings. But death, he thought, was the only truth left uncorrupted. It waited for even the stars. As he stood watching, a sudden tremor passed through the city, subtle yet unmistakable. The light from the spires flickered, and for a heartbeat, the sky turned red, like blood spilled across glass. The crowd fell silent, looking upward in confusion. Then the moment passed. Laughter returned, louder than before, as if defiance could banish the omen. But Lirin knew better. He had felt the touch of something immense, an invisible hand brushing against the edges of reality. The veil had stirred. He retreated from the balcony, heart pounding with a sensation he had almost forgotten. Fear. For the first time in an age, he felt mortal. His reflection in the glass rippled, shifting subtly, and for an instant, another face stared back, pale, ecstatic, mouth open in a silent scream. He blinked, and it was gone. The air tasted of copper. He sat upon the floor, the wine forgotten beside him, and whispered to no one, "What have we done?" The walls pulsed faintly in answer, their organic patterns shifting like veins beneath translucent skin. He knew then that the change had already begun. The gods they had forgotten were awakening, and one of them was being born from their own souls. And somewhere, in the infinite dark between stars, a new light trembled, faint, crimson, alive. It was not the light of creation, but of hunger, the first breath of she who thirsts. The empire glittered like a crown made of dying suns. From orbit, the Eldar homeworlds gleamed. Oceans turned to glass, cities grown from coral and crystal, forests that whispered in tones only the psychic could hear. To the unknowing eye, they seemed divine, but to those who looked closer, the perfection was suffocating. Every motion, every word, every pleasure had become an art form performed before mirrors of vanity. There was no silence left, only applause echoing from 1,000,000 temples of excess. The Eldar did not live anymore, they performed eternity. Liren Val walked through the heart of the imperial capital, a world whose name had long since shed its meaning. Once it was a cradle of science, now it was a theatre of sensation. The air itself was perfumed with narcotic pollen. Beneath the skies of liquid gold, he passed beings who had reshaped their forms to fit their desires. Bodies fused with wings of light, skin that shimmered with sentient colour. He remembered when such transformations were rare, a celebration of mastery. Now they were fashion. He could not tell where beauty ended and madness began. In the distance, the Palace of Echoes towered like a frozen starburst, its surface alive with psychic resonance. The walls sang softly with the emotions of those inside. It was there that the High Sybarite, the ruler of the Central Dominion, held her feasts. Liren had been summoned. He suspected why. His abstinence had drawn attention. In a world that worshipped sensation, restraint was rebellion. He crossed the great bridge of glass leading to the palace, each step resonating like a note in a forgotten song. Inside, thousands had gathered. Music thrummed through the floor, not heard but felt, tuned to the rhythm of the nervous system. The air shimmered with psychic projections, colours born of lust, joy, envy, fear. The guests moved in slow, graceful patterns, each moment choreographed for beauty's sake. Servitors made of living light poured wine that never emptied. The High Sybarite reclined upon a throne of veined marble, her skin luminescent, her eyes twin voids of pleasure. When she smiled, it was like the promise of annihilation. Liren Val, she purred, her voice resonating within his skull rather than his ears. You hide in your towers and write of restraint, while the universe celebrates its triumph. Tell us, are you ashamed of joy? He bowed low. I am not ashamed, my lady, only cautious. Every flame, no matter how bright, consumes what feeds it. The room rippled with laughter, high and cruel. And yet, she said, is that not the nature of existence, to burn? She gestured, and dancers appeared, their forms mutable, flickering between male and female, mortal and divine. They moved like liquid fire, their emotions bleeding into the air. The crowd gasped as the dance became something darker, a ritual disguised as art. Psychic energy surged, visible to the naked eye, drawing the attention of the warp beyond. Liren felt it again, the whisper, the presence forming in the void. He turned away, but the Sybarite was watching him closely. You feel it too, don't you? She whispered into his mind. That beautiful terror, the tremor beneath the world. We are awakening something greater than ourselves. It is not awakening, he said quietly. It is feeding. Her laughter was soft, almost affectionate. Then let it feed. What is divinity but hunger perfected? He left before dawn, the echoes of her words following him like ghosts. Outside, the world seemed to hum. Every soul on the planet was part of the same unending chorus, and the song was growing louder. He looked to the horizon, where the spires met the first light of morning. The sky rippled faintly, colours folding into one another, the warp bleeding through the veil. None noticed, none cared. The empire had become too radiant to see its own decay. In the days that followed, he sought counsel from the last remaining seers of his house. They dwelt in the caverns beneath the crystal lakes, far from the noise of the cities. There, among still waters and whispering quartz, he found Elder Sathra, whose eyes were milky with age, yet burned with inner fire. "You have seen it," she said before he could speak. "The shadow that feeds upon song." He knelt. The warp grows restless. Every pleasure they indulge seems to make it stronger. I feel it watching. "It is more than watching," she said. "It is listening. Every emotion we release becomes a note in its birth cry. The moment will come when the cry becomes form, and form will become God. She will rise, born from our reflection, the child of our desire and our arrogance." Lyren's voice trembled. "Can it be stopped?" "Only if we remember sorrow. Only if we remember restraint. But look above Lyren. Do you see sorrow in their eyes? They have forgotten even fear." He stood in silence. The lake's surface shimmered with psychic light, showing visions of the capital above. Laughter, ecstasy, oblivion. In the reflection, the water darkened, faces distorted. For a heartbeat, he saw a shape vast and formless beneath the surface, stirring. Then it was gone. When he emerged from the caverns, the wind carried the scent of burning incense and synthetic rain. Ships crossed the sky in trails of pale fire, carrying nobles to their floating gardens. He passed a group of artists sculpting with their minds, solidifying emotion into form. One shaped agony into something beautiful, a sculpture that screamed soundlessly as it turned to crystal. The crowd applauded. Lyren felt sick. At the city's edge, he found the young, children born into a world that had never known quiet. They played in the psychic glow of fountains that whispered dreams. One of them approached him, her eyes shining with unnatural awareness. "Why do you frown, old one?" she asked. "The world is perfect." "Perfection," he said softly, "is the last illusion before the fall." She tilted her head, confused, then laughed, a sound too wise for her years. He realized she could already sense the warp through her soul. Even innocence was vanishing. That night, he stood once more upon his balcony. The stars seemed closer now, brighter, as though leaning in to watch. He felt small beneath their gaze. The laughter from the lower levels rose again, louder, more desperate, as if they feared silence itself. And beneath it all, he heard the murmur of the warp, no longer distant. It pulsed like a heartbeat beneath reality's skin. He pressed his palms against the railing and whispered to the night, "If the gods still watch, let them see what we have become." But no gods answered. The old deities of the Eldar had grown silent, their temples abandoned to pleasure cults. Only the new presence stirred, unseen, unfathomable, waiting to be born. He closed his eyes, and in that moment the city shuddered. Every light flared white, every mind trembled with a shared ecstasy. The veil rippled like water disturbed by breath. He saw it clearly now, the Empire's soul, luminous and doomed, glowing like a candle before the storm. And from the darkness beyond the stars came a whisper, gentle, feminine, infinite. "Keep singing." There was a tremor in the dreams of the Eldar. It began as a whisper at the edge of sleep, a melody without origin, a pulse that grew stronger each night. Across the Empire, artists woke weeping, lovers trembled mid-embrace, and seers tore the runes from their altars. The warp was no longer distant. It was pressing against the walls of their thoughts, murmuring like a tide beneath the flesh of reality. Those who listened too closely heard their own voices answering back. It was not madness, it was recognition. Something vast and ancient was forming in the reflection of their desires, and its birth song was being written in their dreams. Lyren had stopped sleeping. The night after his meeting with the seer Saithra, he felt the first true shiver of the warp's breath. A pressure behind his eyes, a sweetness in the air that turned to rot the moment he noticed it. Every surface seemed alive, every silence charged with hidden meaning. He had once believed the warp to be a mirror of thought. Now he feared it had become a mouth. Each day he felt it open wider. He wandered through the archives of his house, searching for fragments of forgotten prophecy. The halls were silent, except for the hum of psychic wards flickering faintly. He read of the ancient gods, Isha, Kurnus, Asurian, and how they had shaped the Eldar in their own image, perfect, eternal, radiant. Yet even gods had fallen silent under the weight of their children's pride. Their statues stared back at him with cracked eyes. He wondered if they too could hear the approaching storm. Outside, the capital's skyline rippled like heat above sand. The psychic energy of billions shimmered in the atmosphere, bending light into impossible shapes. The people called it the breath of divinity. Lirin knew it was the symptom of a wound. The warp bled through unseen seams, flooding the air with its intoxication. The sky itself seemed alive, colours shifting like emotion. He had begun to fear that the stars were not watching. They were warning. In the great plaza below, a new cult was forming. They called themselves the Choristers of the Veil. They wore no armour, no symbols, only veils of iridescent fabric that moved without wind. Their rituals were not violent but beautiful, slow dances of surrender beneath floating lanterns. Yet each movement released psychic energy that rippled through the crowd. Those who watched too long began to smile with vacant ecstasy. Lirin stood at the edge, unseen, and felt his heart tighten. The cult's leader was young, her voice soft and melodic. "We do not create gods," she said. "We become them." He turned away, his breath sharp with fear. Once, he would have called such gatherings heresy. Now they were festivals, sponsored by the highest houses. Even the Sybarite who had mocked him days ago was rumoured to host secret ceremonies beneath her palace. Orgies not of flesh, but of spirit. Souls entwined across the warp, feeding it with their union. He wondered how long before the veil tore entirely. At night, he found himself wandering the outer districts where the light of the spires faded into shadow. There, the forgotten lived. Artisans too poor to sustain the pleasures of the inner rings. Outcasts who remembered humility. Their homes were dim, their laughter faint. Yet in their weariness, he saw a remnant of sanity. A child offered him water in a cup of carved bone. "You look tired, wanderer," she said. "Are you running from the lights?" He smiled faintly. "Perhaps I am." "They say the lights speak now," she whispered. "My mother says they call our names in the wind." "Does she listen?" "She says if you listen too long, you stop being you." Her innocence cut deeper than prophecy. He gave her his cloak and left before dawn, unable to bear the sound of the distant laughter from the city. As he walked, he realized the laughter never stopped anymore, day or night. It was as if the entire empire had forgotten silence existed. The following evening, Sethra summoned him again. He descended once more into the crystalline caverns, but this time the air was colder, denser, vibrating faintly with unseen presence. The seer sat by the lake, her eyes open but unseeing, her voice trembling. "It grows faster than we dreamed. The warp is no longer listening. It is answering." "What can we do?" he asked. "Flee, if you can. There are paths through the webway still untouched. Some will escape, though few will understand why. But do not think you can save them, Lirin. They no longer wish to be saved." He looked into the lake. The reflection no longer showed his face, but a shifting shadow with eyes of light. It smiled. For a heartbeat, he felt drawn toward it, not by fear, but by longing. It promised release from the ache of restraint, from the endless burden of thought. The whisper that followed was soft as breath. You have suffered enough. He tore his gaze away, shattering the vision. The water rippled, and Sathra's voice hardened. That is how it begins. Desire disguised as mercy. The voice knows what each heart fears most. He turned to her. And you, what does it whisper to you? She smiled sadly. It tells me the truth, that even gods die screaming. A tremor ran through the ground, deep and resonant. Crystals above them cracked, shedding light like falling stars. Lyrin felt his pulse quicken. What was that? The first contraction, she said. The child of our making stirs. When it wakes, our souls will feed its birth. He left the caverns in silence, the weight of her words pressing into his chest. Above, the sky was alive. Auroras of unnatural colour rippled across the horizon. The people cheered, believing it a sign of favour from their forgotten gods. Lyrin knew it was something else entirely, the warp bleeding into the material realm. Reality was thinning, stretched like glass about to shatter. In the following days, the tremors continued. Machines malfunctioned without cause, voices spoke from empty halls, and shadows lingered too long before catching up to their owners. Some began to vanish, not in violence, but in surrender, dissolving into bursts of light, as if consumed by invisible fire. The High Sybarite declared it divine ascension. The cult spread faster than ever. Lyrin felt the walls closing around him. He retreated to his tower, sealing its psychic wards. For the first time in centuries, he prayed, not to the old gods, but to silence itself. Yet even there, in the solitude of his chamber, he could not escape the sound. It was faint but constant, a heartbeat, steady, patient, echoing through the warp. He knew it was not his own. He walked to the balcony once more, where the stars hung motionless. He spoke softly to the night. If this is the price of perfection, then perfection was our sin. The wind carried his words away, swallowed by laughter that no longer sounded entirely mortal. Far beyond the rim of the empire, the warp convulsed. A shape of impossible beauty opened its unseen eyes. Across the heavens, 1,000 psychic flares erupted as if in response. Those attuned to the Imperium screamed and fell to their knees. A sound like music rippled through the cosmos, not heard, but felt in the marrow of creation. And deep within the warp, something smiled for the first time. The tremors did not stop. They became rhythm, a pulse that no one could escape. In the crystal cities of the Eldar, the sound of celebration now merged with something darker, something alive beneath the surface. The streets gleamed brighter, the laughter grew louder, and yet the air carried a taste of ash. Those who still dreamed woke screaming. Those who could no longer dream simply smiled too wide and stared at the sky, waiting for a light that was not the sun. It was as if every soul in the empire had begun to sway to an invisible heartbeat, the heartbeat of the god they had unknowingly conceived. Lyrian moved through the crowds unseen, cloaked in psychic concealment. The plazas shimmered with illusions, colours that twisted into flesh, music that bled into thought. Pleasure temples glowed like living organs, pulsing with the energy of thousands who gathered within to feed on sensation. The warp's influence had become inseparable from reality. It breathed through them, reshaping them in its image. He saw lovers whose skin flickered with raw emotion, dancers whose movements distorted the air. They were beautiful beyond comprehension, and horrifying for that very reason. Every act of ecstasy was a prayer. every sigh a hymn. He turned into an alleyway to escape the din, but the walls themselves seemed to follow him, rippling as if aware of his presence. Once, he would have trusted the psychic architecture that made Eldar cities living beings. Now it pulsed with alien hunger. The stones remembered the screams of those who had vanished. He reached the end of the passage and found a body. No wounds, no decay, only emptiness. The flesh was whole, but the soul had been devoured, leaving behind a shell still warm. The eyes reflected starlight that was not there. He knelt beside it, whispering the old words of release, though he knew they no longer worked. The warp had stolen the meaning from prayer. When he rose, he saw movement at the edge of his vision. A figure draped in silk, face half hidden behind a mask shaped like a smile. "Do not mourn, traveller," the figure said softly. "She has been chosen." Lorraine's voice was low. Chosen by what? By joy. The masked one stepped closer, and the voice shifted. Male, then female, then both at once. "Can you not feel it? The tide rising? We are becoming infinite. Pain, desire, memory, all one current. We are the wave, and it is almost here." He reached out instinctively, but the figure dissolved into mist, leaving behind only the scent of flowers and blood. Leren stumbled back, his heart hammering. He knew what he had seen. Not illusion, but manifestation. The warp was no longer reaching through dreams. It was walking their streets. He returned to his tower before dawn. The wards flickered as he entered, straining to keep the corruption outside. Yet even here, in solitude, he could feel the vibration in the air, faint, seductive. The city sang in whispers. He pressed his hands to the wall, feeling it thrum beneath his fingers like a living vein. "Enough," he said aloud. "Enough of this madness." But the madness had a voice now. It answered from within his mind, sweet as honey. "You asked for meaning. You will find it when you stop fearing what you are." He tried to shut it out, but the voice laughed softly. It sounded like everyone he had ever loved. He struck the wall until blood marked the surface. The voice only sighed. "Soon, all will be free of shame. There will be no need for walls." He sank to the floor, trembling. For a long time, he listened to his own breathing, to the distant roar of celebration that never ended. When he finally stood again, he went to his console and activated the old communication network of the scholar houses. Dozens of nodes lit up, flickering with static, before one stabilized. The image of Sathra, her face illuminated by dim crystal light. "You should have fled," she said before he could speak. "It has begun. Tell me what you see." Her gaze drifted upward. Behind her, the cavern ceiling shimmered with auroras, light from the surface piercing through rock as if reality had turned translucent. "The warp is inside the stone now. The lakes burn from within. The echoes of our thoughts are becoming shapes. I hear them whispering my name, even when I am awake." He clenched his fists. There must be something left, a way to resist. "There is no resistance against birth, Lorraine. Only acceptance or flight." "Then tell me where to go." Her voice softened. "There are gates in the webway that still hold. Not for long. Find the passage through the obsidian spire near the North Pole. Take whoever still remembers fear." He nodded, but before he could answer, the connection flickered. For an instant, Sathra's image distorted. Her face split into a dozen expressions at once, some smiling, some screaming. Then the light died. He stood alone in the dark. Outside, the city howled with euphoria. He could feel the pulse of the warp deep beneath his feet, beating faster. The godchild was nearing birth. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat, he saw through the walls, countless souls writhing in ecstasy, their psychic energy streaming upward into the heavens like fire. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. By nightfall, he was moving through the northern quarter, cloaked once more. The streets were deserted now. Most had gone to the central sanctuaries where the cults promised transcendence. The silence felt wrong, too still, too heavy. He saw statues that had melted into flesh, fountains flowing with liquid light. The city was no longer architecture, it was metamorphosis. At the base of the obsidian spire, he found others waiting. A few dozen at most, their faces pale with terror. Soldiers, scholars, children. Survivors who still knew fear. They looked to him as he approached, and he realized none of them could speak. The air around them shimmered, pressing against their throats like invisible hands. Only thought could pass between them now. They had become creatures of silence. He led them toward the gate, carved in black stone, its surface rippling like water. Beyond it lay the webway, a labyrinth of ancient tunnels that might still hold against the storm. But as they neared it, a sound rose behind them, the roar of countless voices merging into one. They turned and saw the horizon bloom with impossible light. The central city had erupted into psychic flame. Towers collapsed inward, drawn into a vortex of brilliance. From its heart, a shape rose, immense, radiant, terrible. The newborn god had opened its eyes. Larian fell to his knees as the light washed over them. He felt it tear through his soul like fire through silk, searching for entry. He shielded his mind with every ounce of discipline he possessed. Behind him, some of the refugees screamed without sound and vanished, their bodies dissolving into radiance. The rest stumbled forward through the gate. He turned one last time to look at the world that had been his home. The skies were gone, replaced by the burning heart of the warp. He stepped into the webway, the portal sealing behind him with a hiss of final breath. The last sound he heard from the dying world was laughter, not joyous, not cruel, but eternal. The webway was a wound in reality that refused to close. Its corridors twisted beyond geometry, neither dark nor light, a space that pulsed like the inside of a great living thing. Liren and the survivors moved through it in silence, guided only by the faint psychic resonance of ancient markers left by forgotten ancestors. The air was thin and electric, heavy with the taste of metal and memory. Each step echoed as if the sound had nowhere to go, trapped in endless folds of time. Behind them, the portal to their world had sealed. The laughter was gone, but its echo lingered, a whisper at the edge of thought. Liren led the way, his mind reaching ahead to sense the distortions that marked unstable paths. The survivors followed, 30 perhaps, though even that number changed as the tunnels shifted. Some seemed to fade into shadow without sound, their presence thinning like smoke. No one spoke. Speech felt dangerous here, as though words might summon the very thing they fled. He could still feel it, faint but constant. The pulse of the newborn god stretching outward, feeding, searching for the fragments of its creators that had slipped away. It would find them, in time. The walls of the passage were carved from impossible substance, a fusion of thought and matter, shimmering with half-seen patterns that rearranged when unobserved. The oldest legends said the webway had been built by hands older than the Eldar themselves, a gift of the Old Ones, or a prison they left behind. Now it felt like neither. It felt like the inside of a dying mind, vast and full of echoes. Hours passed, or years. Time had no meaning here. The survivors began to change. The psychic fields of the webway bent around them, warping their thoughts into visions. One woman began to weep softly, saying she saw her lost lover walking beside her, though none could see him. A boy whispered that the walls were singing his name. Lirin told them to focus, to keep moving, but even his voice sounded distant to his own ears, stretched thin across reality's edge. When they reached the first junction, the air shimmered with colour. 3 paths lay ahead, each identical, each whispering a different truth. To the left, the air smelled of rain and fertile soil, a memory of the Eldar homeworlds before decadence. To the right, faint laughter, soft and inviting. Ahead, only silence. Lirin closed his eyes and reached into the quiet. The silence did not tempt. It waited. He chose that path. The corridor narrowed as they walked, and the light dimmed until it was like walking through the inside of a dream. Faint motes of energy drifted through the air, glowing like dust in moonlight. One brushed Lirin's hand and vanished, leaving a trace of warmth. He realized what they were. Fragments of souls torn from the millions consumed in the fall. The webway was full of them, drifting like fireflies in a grave. Each one carried a whisper, a thought cut off mid-sentence. Together, they formed a choir of half-remembered lives. He stopped, unable to move for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. So many voices, so much loss. The others pressed close, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "Keep walking," he said quietly. "Do not listen." But it was too late. The air trembled with the echo of a single word, spoken by no one. "Why?" The word struck through him like a blade. He saw again the cities burning, the faces of the joyous as they dissolved into light. He saw Sathra's final smile. He wanted to answer, to explain, but no answer would come. The word was not accusation, it was mourning. The souls of the dead did not hate, they simply did not understand. He walked faster, forcing the group onward. The path began to widen again, opening into a vast chamber where pillars of obsidian stretched upward into infinity. In the centre stood an ancient gate, dormant, its frame covered in sigils too old to read. Faint energy flickered within it, like the heartbeat of something asleep. Lirin recognized it at once. An exit, perhaps even a path to safety. But the gate was sealed. He approached cautiously, reaching out with his mind. The mechanism resisted, locked by an intelligence long gone. Then, without warning, the air quivered. The survivors recoiled as the chamber filled with a low hum. From the darkness above, something descended. Not a creature, not exactly, but a form woven from light and shadow, its edges unraveling into strands of energy. It spoke with the voices of many. "Why do you flee from your own creation?" Lirin stepped forward, trembling. "We flee from our death." "There is no death," the voices replied, "only return. You built eternity from desire, and now eternity comes to claim you." He felt its presence pressing against his mind, vast and endless. Behind him, some of the survivors fell to their knees, whispering prayers to gods that no longer answered. The entity drifted closer, its form shifting into familiar faces, lovers, friends, even his own reflection. "Come back," it said. "You were beautiful before you feared yourself." Lirin closed his eyes. "I remember beauty," he said softly. "But I remember silence too. You are not what we dreamed. You are what our dreaming destroyed." The entity tilted its head, as though listening. Then it laughed, a sound of countless throats, hollow and sweet. "It does not matter. The song has already begun." It dissolved into mist, leaving the chamber shaking with residual light. The gate flared open. Lirin stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. The survivors cried out, clutching one another. Beyond the gate lay a void, not darkness, but blinding white, like the interior of a dying star. He knew it was not safety, only distance, yet it was all they had left. Through the gate, he commanded. One by one, they passed through, their forms dissolving into the light. He was the last to remain. As he turned to follow, he looked back once more at the chamber. The motes of soul light drifted upward, drawn toward unseen skies. He whispered a final prayer, not for salvation, but remembrance. If any still here, forgive us for what we became. Then he stepped forward into the light. For a moment, there was peace. The sound of laughter faded, replaced by the slow exhale of a dying world. And then behind him, the webway screamed, a single shattering note that echoed across eternity. The light swallowed them whole, and for a moment there was nothing. No sound, no space, no thought. Then slowly, form returned. The survivors emerged into a vast expanse of darkness lit by a dim, shifting glow that seemed to come from the air itself. They stood upon a narrow bridge of translucent stone that stretched endlessly in both directions, suspended above an abyss that pulsed with faint, multicolored storms. The webway had spat them out into one of its hidden arteries, a place beyond maps and memory. For the first time since the fall, the silence felt almost sacred. Lirin stood motionless, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Behind him, the others gathered, fewer now, though he did not count them. Numbers meant little when even identity began to blur. Some wept silently, the sound small and human against the infinite. Others simply stared into the void below, faces pale with the exhaustion of survival. The air vibrated faintly with residual warp energy, but here it was distant, restrained. This place, whatever it was, had not yet been devoured by the newborn god. He exhaled slowly, the breath trembling. "We live," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. A woman's voice answered softly. "For how long?" Lirin turned to her, one of the scholars from the northern houses, her name already half forgotten. She clutched a fragment of crystal that glowed faintly with psychic light, her knuckles white. "As long as we must," he said, "until we find ground that does not dream." They began to move again, their steps echoing faintly on the glass-like bridge. Around them, the abyss shifted with slow grace, vast storms of colour folding in upon themselves, like thoughts dissolving into memory. Lirin felt the pull of the warp beyond, the faint hum of temptation, but here it was muffled, as though the air itself remembered the purpose of restraint. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope. Hours passed, or centuries. The webway had no concept of time. They walked until exhaustion blurred into trance, until movement became prayer. Then the bridge widened, leading them into an open chamber suspended in emptiness. Pillars of black stone rose from unseen depths, supporting platforms veined with pale light. At the center stood a structure that glowed faintly. An ancient gate, smaller than the one they had used, its runes dormant but intact. Lirin felt his heart quicken. "A nexus," he murmured, "an anchor between realms." The others gathered around, eyes glimmering with a fragile mixture of awe and fear. The scholar placed her crystal fragment against the gate's frame. The runes flickered, then steadied, pulsing with dim gold light. "It still breathes," she said softly, "but it is asleep." He knelt before the gate, pressing his palm to the cold surface. The material was smooth, yet alive, thrumming faintly beneath his skin. He reached inward with his mind, tracing the ancient energy lines that powered its core. He could feel its exhaustion, a relic of an age long past, barely clinging to coherence. Beyond it, faint impressions stirred, worlds half forgotten, sanctuaries buried in shadow. It leads somewhere, he said, but not to the worlds we knew. Then where? Someone whispered. He hesitated. Away. They looked at him as if the word itself were a blessing. Even exile was mercy compared to what they had fled. He rose and turned to face them. If we pass through, there may be no return. We may not find light, or air, or life, but we will be beyond her reach, at least for a time. A murmur passed through the group. Some nodded, others wept quietly. No one refused. The will to live had become instinct, stripped of meaning but not of force. Lirain began the awakening ritual. His voice echoed through the chamber, reciting syllables older than their civilization. The runes flared brighter, each pulse matched by a faint tremor beneath their feet. As the final words left his lips, the gate opened, not with light, but with a sound like a sigh. Space folded inward, revealing a shimmer of mist that seemed neither substance nor void. Then the air changed. A faint wind rose, carrying the scent of ash and roses. The survivors turned as one. From the far end of the chamber, a figure approached across the bridge. Graceful, luminous, its form shifting with each step. For a moment, it appeared to be an Eldar woman clad in woven starlight, her eyes kind, almost mournful. But beneath that beauty was movement, tendrils of shadow sliding like serpents beneath translucent skin. Lirain felt his blood run cold. "Stay back," he whispered. The figure smiled. Her voice was a whisper within every mind. "You cannot run forever, my children. The womb is vast, but even the stars are part of me." The scholar beside him clutched her head, screaming without sound. Light burst from her eyes, her body folding inward before dissolving into dust. The others staggered, clutching their temples. The air thickened with psychic pressure. The presence of the newborn god's essence, reaching through the webway like a hand searching for lost fragments. Lirain fell to his knees, teeth clenched. "You are not life," he hissed through the pain. "You are hunger made divine." The figure tilted her head, and for an instant her face became his own. "And yet you made me. I am what your soul desired when it forgot the meaning of enough." He rose, drawing the small crystalline blade he carried. A weapon more symbolic than real, forged to focus psychic energy. "Then let me be the reminder." He drove the blade into the gate's core, channeling his mind through it. The chamber erupted in light, raw and blinding. The figure screamed, not in pain, but in fury, as the webway itself convulsed. The survivors clung to the pillars, their bodies outlined in fire. Lirain felt the energy tear through him, burning thought and flesh alike. But the gate responded, its runes flaring white. The void behind it opened wide, and a wind unlike any he had felt surge through the chamber. The survivors were lifted, drawn into the light. He saw their forms dissolve, scattered across eternity. The figure lunged toward him, eyes blazing with desire, but the gate's energy surged again, consuming everything in its path. Lirain smiled faintly as the edges of his vision dissolved. "We remember," he whispered. "Even if we die, we remember." The last thing he saw was the collapsing chamber folding inward, the bridge shattering into fragments of frozen light. The gate pulsed once, then vanished, sealing itself against the void. And somewhere, far beyond the ruin, a single spark drifted into new space, a fragment of consciousness, carrying with it the memory of loss and the first seed of survival. Darkness spread, infinite and formless, until it remembered itself. Within that void drifted the spark that had once been Liren Val. No longer body, no longer bound to flesh or fear. He existed as thought suspended between two dying worlds, the one he had fled and the one that had not yet begun. Around him, fragments of the survivors' souls drifted like dust motes caught in a forgotten beam of light. Each fragment whispered fragments of memory, laughter, screams, names, dissolving before he could gather them. He had tried to speak once, but sound had no meaning here. Time was not a river anymore. It was a still lake, reflecting nothing. Eventually, the silence broke, not by sound, but by motion. The void began to ripple, like breath stirring ash. Colours bled into the dark, faint, impossible hues that pulsed with slow rhythm. It was not the warp, not entirely. This place was somewhere between its hunger and the material realm. It was sanctuary, perhaps, or limbo. Liren felt the remnants of his form pull together, clothed in shadow and faint light. His heartbeat returned, a solitary drum against the eternal hush. When he opened his eyes, he stood upon the floor of a vast cavern made of glass, suspended above an ocean that glowed faintly from within. The air tasted of salt and memory. He was not alone. Across the cavern, figures were stirring, silhouettes of those who had crossed with him. They were different now, their bodies ethereal yet defined, their eyes lit by the same faint glow that filled the air. The scholar stood nearest, the one who had died at the gate. But her presence was gentle now, her face calm, the pain gone. She smiled, though her voice came not from her lips, but from the air between them. "We are not dead." Liren approached slowly, his movements unsteady. "Then what are we?" "Remnants," she said, "fragments of the pattern that was. The webway did not destroy us, it changed us." He looked toward the horizon, where the glowing sea met a sky of endless twilight. "Is this what remains of creation?" "No. This is what remains of mercy." Her form flickered briefly, a ripple of distortion passing through her outline. The gate scattered us across the unseen, corridors of reality. Some fell into oblivion, some became dreams, but a few, us, were caught here, in a fold the warp could not consume. Liren turned away, struggling to accept the stillness. After so long fleeing chaos, the absence of pain felt unreal. Yet beneath the calm, he sensed something restless, a vibration deep within the world's bones. "It's not over," he whispered. "She will reach even here." The scholar inclined her head. "Perhaps, but not yet. The child of our sin feeds upon excess, not upon silence. As long as we remain unseen, unfeeling, we are ghosts beyond her notice." Her words were a comfort and a curse. To survive by denial was not life. Liren walked to the edge of the cavern, where the floor became transparent, revealing the glowing ocean below. Within its depths, he saw movement. Shadows swimming, forming shapes too vast to comprehend. They were not creatures, but echoes. Memories of the Eldar civilization trapped within the fold. Cities flickered beneath the surface, built from thought and reflection, inhabited by echoes of those long gone. He realized this place was not sanctuary at all. It was remembrance given form. The others began to descend toward the water, drawn by its glow. When their feet touched the surface, it held them like glass. Ripples spread outward, and the light beneath responded, brighter, more alive. Liren hesitated, then followed. The instant his foot touched the surface, he felt warmth rush through him, a cascade of sensation long forgotten. He saw the world before the fall, the gardens of crystalline light, the laughter of the uncorrupted. the serenity of creation before pride had stained it. For a heartbeat, he almost believed they could begin again. But then the light beneath darkened. The ocean stirred, its depths swirling with colour that should not exist. He saw faces within it, not serene now, but twisted in ecstasy and pain. The echo of the god's laughter trembled through the water. The scholar cried out, her form flickering violently. "She remembers us." Lirin reached for her, his hand passing through her fading shape. The light erupted, casting the cavern in blinding brilliance. From the depths rose a shadow, fluid, shapeless, vast. It was not the god herself, but her reflection. A ripple of her birth still echoing through eternity. It moved toward them, drawn by the last vestiges of their memory. "Run!" he shouted, though there was nowhere to go. The survivors scattered across the glowing expanse, their bodies dissolving into streams of light. The shadow reached upward, tendrils of darkness coiling toward Lirin. He felt the air shatter as it touched him. Every emotion he had buried rushed back. Grief, love, guilt, longing. The god fed on those feelings, and he felt her feeding. In that instant, he understood. To survive, he must not flee her hunger. He must deny it nourishment. He steadied his breath, forcing stillness into his mind. He closed his eyes and spoke inwardly. Not a prayer, but a vow. "I remember, but I do not feel. I exist, but I do not desire." The darkness hesitated. The tendrils froze, suspended like smoke. Then slowly they withdrew, curling back into the sea. The light dimmed again, leaving only silence. The scholar's voice returned, faint but clear. "You held against her. How?" "By becoming what we feared most," he said. "Empty." The survivors gathered once more, shaken but alive. Above them, the cavern ceiling glowed faintly with distant stars. Not real stars, but memories of them, flickering like promises of worlds long gone. For the first time, Lirin understood what this place demanded. Stillness, absence, vigilance. To remain here was to exist outside passion, beyond temptation. It was to become the echo of a people who had once thought themselves eternal. He turned to the others, his voice quiet. "This world cannot be rebuilt. It can only be remembered. We are what remains of the Eldar, the witnesses. We cannot return to the stars, but we can guard their memory." The survivors bowed their heads. One by one, they stepped into the glowing water until their forms merged with its surface, becoming lights adrift upon the sea. Lirin lingered last, watching as their radiance spread across the cavern like constellations reborn. He felt the weight of solitude settle upon him, heavy but necessary. When he finally stepped into the water, the ocean embraced him without resistance. His body dissolved into warmth, his thoughts scattering like starlight. Yet one truth remained, the faint whisper that would one day become legend among those who would find this place in ages yet to come. From the silence, they endured. Ages passed, though the concept of time had long dissolved. Within the luminous ocean of memory where once the survivors had drifted as fragments of light, new motion began. From the stillness, whispers emerged, faint ripples of thought gathering shape. The calm had endured, but nothing remained untouched forever. Silence, too, can decay. The fold that shielded them from the warp began to tremble as unseen currents pressed against its borders. The dream of safety was ending. Lirin stirred within the light. He no longer remembered his body, only the echo of breath and the pulse of will. The others were distant, their forms faintly visible as points of soft glow scattered across the endless expanse. When he reached toward them, He felt their fading, not death, but forgetfulness. They were becoming part of the place itself, dissolving into its peace. He alone resisted. A fragment of longing, stubborn and sharp, still burned within him. It called him upward, toward the faint shimmer that hung above the sea like a veil waiting to be torn. He rose through the water, emerging into a sky of glass and trembling stars. The cavern had changed. The pillars that once supported it had sunk beneath the surface, and the light of the ceiling had dimmed to pale blue. He could feel it, the vibration of the warp far beyond, like a heartbeat returning after centuries of stillness. The god they had fled was stirring again, her hunger stretching through the labyrinth of dimensions. The fold was failing. Liren walked across the surface of the water, each step leaving ripples of light that faded behind him. He reached the center of the chamber where once the gate had been. Now there stood only a wound, a thin tear in the air that bled faint gold. It pulsed weakly, alive but wounded. He sensed it had been part of the webway once, severed by his own hand when he destroyed the gate. Yet the echo of its pathways still lingered beyond, calling him back into the living galaxy. For the first time in uncounted ages, he felt fear. To return would mean facing the ruins of what had been, the ash of their empire, and perhaps the gaze of the god herself. But to remain was to fade into nothing, to become one more whisper in the ocean of memory. He had sworn to guard remembrance, yet what use was a guardian if the memory itself vanished? He placed his hand upon the tear. The surface rippled, warm and electric. Behind it, faint impressions flickered. Vast cities of shadow, ships sailing through void, stars reborn in the aftermath of death. The galaxy lived still, and somewhere, among its fractures, his people had survived, not as they were, but as something else. He hesitated, then stepped forward. The wound accepted him. The world folded. When vision returned, he stood upon solid ground for the first time in eternity. The sky above was black as ink, lit by a blood-red star that burned low upon the horizon. Around him stretched a plain of broken obsidian, windless, silent. The air smelled of metal and rain. He fell to his knees, the sensation of gravity almost unbearable. Every breath felt like the first breath ever taken. In the distance, faint lights flickered, cities perhaps, or reflections of them. He rose unsteadily, walking toward the nearest glow. As he drew closer, the terrain began to change. Towering spires rose from the ground, sharp and elegant, built from glass and bone. They reminded him of the old worlds, yet darker, crueler. At their base moved figures, tall, lithe, their armor black and barbed, their eyes glinting with pale fire. He felt their presence brush against his mind, psychic signatures unmistakably Eldar, but twisted, sharpened by endless suffering. He realized then where he had come, not back to the old empire, but into its shadow, the realm his descendants had built in the wake of ruin. Comera, the dark city. He stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking its impossible sprawl. Labyrinthine towers stretched into infinity, woven together by threads of shimmering energy. Rivers of stolen light flowed through its streets, and screams, distant, melodic, drifted upward like song. The air itself was alive with cruelty refined into art. He watched as warriors descended from the sky in sleek black craft, their movements graceful as dancers. Below, in arenas of fire, captives fought and bled for the pleasure of watching eyes. This was what had become of his people, the survivors of the fall, the heirs of despair. They had conquered death not by denying hunger, but by mastering it. Through agony and theft of soul, they defied the God that had damned them. Each act of cruelty was not sin, but defiance. They fed upon pain to stay unconsumed. It was horror, yet it was survival. Lirin's heart twisted. He felt both revulsion and recognition. This was the price of remembrance, to live knowing what was lost, and to feed upon what remained. His soul trembled on the edge of collapse, but he forced himself to watch. Every scream below, every flash of light, every act of torment was a prayer turned inside out. They had learned to make the gods starve. He whispered to the wind, though no one could hear. You endured. The words carried sorrow, pride, and something beyond both. From below, a voice answered, faint, almost imagined. And so did you. He turned sharply, searching the shadows. A figure stood behind him, cloaked in dark silver, her eyes glowing with cold intelligence. She was one of them, yet her presence was calm, measured, an echo of the restraint he once knew. She studied him for a long moment. You are not of this age, she said. No, he replied. I am what it forgot. Then you are a ghost, she said, and ghosts belong here. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the city pulsed with dark light. Welcome home, Ancient One. Welcome to the last dream of the Eldar. Liren looked out across the abyss of towers and the burning red sky above. He felt the faint pulse of the god's hunger even here, distant but eternal. Yet for the first time, he did not feel fear. He felt understanding. The cycle had not ended. It had evolved. The sin had become armor. The curse had become survival. And he, once the witness of the fall, was now the witness of what rose from it. For a long while, neither of them moved. The wind of Commorragh whispered between the towers like the sigh of a dying star, carrying with it the mingled scent of oil, blood, and strange perfume. Below, the city breathed, a living organism made from cruelty and brilliance, pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat older than time. Liren watched as vessels of black glass drifted through the sky, spilling firelight across the abyss. The woman beside him stood unmoved, her cloak flowing like liquid smoke. You call this a dream, he said at last, his voice quiet, roughened by ages of silence, but it feels like penance. She smiled faintly. Dreams and punishments are the same thing here. The difference lies only in how you endure them. Her tone carried no bitterness, only knowledge, the kind that came from generations born inside darkness. We do not repent, ancestor. We persist. He studied her face. Beneath the armor, she seemed impossibly young, yet her eyes betrayed centuries. They glowed with the faint light of pain refined into wisdom. What do you call yourselves now? He asked. Drukhari, she replied. Those who walk the shadow, those who remember too much. The word struck him like a blade, soft, familiar, inevitable. It was not a name of shame, but of choice. You built this, he murmured, gazing across the sprawl of Commorragh. You made a home inside the very wound that devoured us. She turned to him. We had no choice. To live without sensation is to invite the thirst. To feel is to feed it. So we learned balance, indulgence as discipline, agony as art. You feared the god. We taught her to fear us. Her words filled him with a quiet awe and sorrow. He thought of the old empire, its crystal palaces, its serene arrogance, its fall into madness. The Drukhari were everything that the Eldar had denied, and yet they alone had survived the god's hunger. In them, the shadow of their former glory had found its reflection. How long has it been? He asked. Since the fall. Time is a lie here, she said softly. But in the outer galaxy, thousands of your years have passed. The stars you knew are dust. New empires rise and burn. The children of lesser species claim the void that was once ours. He felt a hollow ache at the words. Then we truly are ghosts. Not ghosts, she said. Predators. We still hunt, still steal the souls of the living to sustain our own. Every cry beyond these walls feeds us. The galaxy thinks us damned, and they are right. But it is better to reign in damnation than fade into mercy. Her gaze turned distant, toward a cluster of towers that glowed crimson against the dark. There are some among us who still seek purity, who whisper of rebuilding what was lost. But we know what purity brings. We remember the price. Lorraine looked toward the depths, where the arenas roared with ecstasy and death. He could feel the vibration of suffering beneath his feet, the energy of billions burning like torches in the dark. It was horror perfected, but it was also life, a refusal to surrender to the God that waited beyond. The realization settled in him with the weight of truth. You have turned our curse into your weapon. She inclined her head. The God hungers for ecstasy and despair. We give her both, but on our terms. Every soul we take is a moment stolen from her feast. And the cost? He asked. Her smile faded. There is always cost. Every dawn we wake less whole. Every night we bleed to remember what it means to exist. The weak become ash. The strong forget what they were. But in forgetting, we survive. He stepped closer to the edge, gazing down upon the city's heart. A massive chasm surrounded by spiraling bridges, glowing with unnatural light. He could feel the hum of the webway beneath, it alive and waiting. This place will not last forever, he said. Nothing does. No, she agreed, but it will last longer than those who pity us. The monkey, the orcs, the upstart races that think themselves eternal. They will vanish like sparks. We were born from perfection and destroyed by desire. There is no extinction worse than that, and yet, here we stand. The faint tremor of admiration crossed his voice. You have made eternity suffer with you. Eternity deserves to suffer, she said simply. The wind shifted, carrying a distant cry that was neither pain nor joy, but something between. Lirin closed his eyes and listened. It reminded him of the laughter from the old world, the same tone that had heralded the fall. But now it carried defiance instead of blindness. He realized that the cycle had not been broken. It had been rewritten. The Drukhari were the mirror that refused to shatter. The woman looked at him once more. You cannot stay as you are, she said. This place consumes memory. Either you join us, or you fade into dust. Choose. He met her gaze, the light of the red star reflected in his eyes. I chose long ago, he said quietly, to remember. Then remember well, she murmured. For in this city, memory is pain, and pain is survival. She turned and walked toward the spires, her figure dissolving into the shifting gloom. Liren remained alone upon the cliff, the vastness of Commorragh stretching beneath him like a living wound. The air pulsed faintly with the heartbeat of a god who had never stopped hungering. He lifted his face to the crimson light, and for the first time in millennia, he smiled. It was not joy nor sorrow, but acceptance, the expression of one who had seen the full circle of creation and ruin, and found meaning in the ashes. Then let the galaxy tremble, he whispered, for we are what remains when the gods grow tired. And somewhere far beyond the dark city, in the endless void where the warp kissed the stars, a distant echo answered him, soft, hungry, eternal. The corridors of Commorragh swallowed him whole. Beneath spires carved from voidstone and bone glass, Lyrian moved without shadow, his footsteps silent on walkways strung like spider silk between towers. The city was endless. Not a place, but a sensation, a state of being forged from pain, memory, and cruel elegance. There were no maps, only instinct. He followed it deeper, past archways that breathed, past statues sculpted from those who displeased their sculptors. The light was dim and hungry. He passed through a market where agony was currency. Stalls sold memories in crystal vials, fear distilled from dying soldiers, laughter stolen from children moments before death. A merchant called to him, offering the scent of hope from a dying world. He did not stop. He could feel the warp's breath even here, faint but near, coiled in the seams of the city. But unlike the world that fell, Comorra had learned not to sing. Here, even pain was restrained by artistry. Through the press of robed courtiers and armoured raiders, he walked unnoticed. To them, he was just another soul broken and reformed in the forges of survival. But beneath his borrowed cloak, he carried memory like a blade. Untainted, sharp, ancient. He had returned not only to witness, but to understand, and perhaps to decide. At the edge of the hollow docks, where void ships waited like hunting beasts, he found her again. The woman with silver eyes and the voice of ash. She stood upon a platform overlooking the docking towers, watching sleek vessels drift into the black beyond. Her armour shimmered with psychic threads, catching light that wasn't there. "You followed," she said without turning. "You left the door open," he replied. She looked at him then. In her gaze was something rare in this place. Not softness, but patience. "You seek something more than survival." "I seek what was lost," he said, "and what became of it." She nodded. "Then you will need to see what Comorra hides, not just what it shows." She led him through a hidden archway behind a mural of chained suns. Beyond it lay silence. The walls no longer breathed. The air was cold, still, untouched by performance. They walked a narrow path downward, deeper than the rest of the city dared to remember. At last, they reached a chamber where no lights burned. Only faint bioluminescence pulsed from vines that grew from the stone like veins. At the center sat a figure, ancient, emaciated, unmoving. His eyes were closed, and his skin was thin as parchment, crisscrossed with scars carved in forgotten runes. The woman knelt beside him and whispered, "This is Asfareth. He remembers everything." Lyrian stepped forward. "Is he asleep?" "No," she said. "He simply chooses not to wake." The figure's eyes opened. They glowed like dying embers. His voice was dust. "You carry the scent of stars that no longer burn." Lyrian lowered his head. "I carry the sin of a world that no longer exists." Asfareth studied him, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then the Old One said, "You wish to know if redemption is possible. I wish to know if survival without surrender is still within reach," Lyrian said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the gravity of eons. At last, Asfareth spoke. "The god we birthed still feeds, but she does not grow. She bloats, she slows. The feast we once offered has become a poison to her. Artifice without wonder, indulgence without ecstasy. She gorges, but she does not thrive. Even gods can die, but only if we starve them slowly." Lyrian felt the truth settle in his bones. "And the Drukhari, they are the blade and the poison both." "Yes," the Old One rasped, "but they are also the wound. They are what remains when survival becomes ritual. Without something new, even they will fade." The woman turned toward him. "That is why we brought you here. Not to remember, but to change." He stepped back. uncertainty flaring. Change into what? Asfereth's voice was softer now. Into something the god cannot feed upon. Not joy, not agony, but balance. Lyrin closed his eyes. He saw again the stars falling, the cities burning, the ocean of memory swallowing him whole. He remembered the silence, the stillness, the choice. He opened his eyes. Then teach me, he said, not how to fight, but how to endure without becoming her. The woman placed a crystal in his palm. It pulsed with a faint light, neither warm nor cold. Then your path begins again, she said. You will walk as one who remembers what others choose to forget. A shadow among shadows, but never blind. Lyrin turned to leave. As he passed through the archway once more, the sounds of Komorra returned, muted, distant, restrained. He looked up at the towers and saw not horror, but a people refusing to vanish, not forgiven, not redeemed, but enduring. And in the far reaches of the city, in halls where the god's whispers still tried to slip through cracks, something paused, something listened. The city had no dawn, yet something like morning came. Lyrin walked its bridges as if they were veins through a sleeping god, each step drawing him deeper into the pulse of Komorra. Above him, towers pierced the void, their tips crowned with flickering fires that burned without heat. Below, rivers of light flowed through chasms lined with glass and steel, carrying the souls of those newly taken, fuel for the endless defiance of his people. He moved through it like a ghost through memory, unseen but not untouched. The air itself seemed to recognize him, whispering fragments of words long dead. His name, his purpose, his sin. He carried the crystal the woman had given him. It pulsed faintly in his palm, a small and patient heartbeat. When he looked into its depths, he saw neither the past nor the future, but reflection. A faint shimmer of himself not as he was, but as he might become. Balance, Asfereth had called it. The word lingered in his mind like a distant star. He descended through the lower tiers, where the city's glamour ended, and its true skeleton was laid bare. The air thickened with heat and machinery. Slaves, mortal and otherwise, toiled in silence beneath the whips of their masters. Their eyes were hollow, their movements mechanical. Each spark from the forges fell like a dying prayer. Yet even here, he sensed the same paradox. Despair shaped into art, suffering arranged with precision. Komorra was not chaos. It was order sculpted from decay. A scream pierced the air, sharp, quick, ritualized. Lyrin turned toward its source and found himself before an amphitheatre carved into the stone. At its center stood a figure in crimson armor, her hands gloved in blades that dripped silver light. Around her, a dozen captives knelt, their faces veiled. The audience watched in reverent silence. Each motion she made was deliberate, graceful, and when her blade struck, they did not kill, but transform. Energy flared, and the captive souls bled into the air as ribbons of color. The crowd inhaled their beauty like perfume. He felt the familiar ache rise within him, the old sorrow, the ancient anger. Yet behind it was something colder, quieter, understanding. These were not monsters. They were descendants of his failure, keeping the god at bay, one exquisite wound at a time. In their cruelty lived preservation. Their agony was not madness, but mastery. The woman in crimson looked up suddenly. Her gaze found him, piercing through the crowd. Without word or gesture, she beckoned. The audience parted, silent. He approached the arena's edge. "You are no acolyte," she said, her voice smooth as broken glass. "Nor are you prey. What brings you to my court, stranger with an ancient scent?" He met her eyes. "Curiosity," he said, "and memory. She smiled faintly, tilting her head. Memory is dangerous here. It tastes too close to guilt. Then perhaps guilt is what I came to feed, he said. Her laughter was soft but cold. Then you are kin to us after all. She stepped closer, the blades retracting from her gloves as the light dimmed. Tell me, Memory Keeper, what do you see when you look upon my art? I see what we became when silence failed, he answered, and what must remain if silence is ever to return. Her smile faded. For a moment, her expression softened, though the edges of cruelty never left it. You speak as one who stood before the fall. I did more than stand, he said quietly. I watched it burn. Something like reverence crossed her face. Then you are a ghost indeed. I was, he said. Now I am witness. The crowd murmured at the words, uneasy, uncertain. The woman studied him for a long moment, then turned away. Witness then, she said. Watch what your children have learned from your ruin. The lights dimmed further. The air grew heavy, charged with energy. The captives had vanished, their essence absorbed into the walls, into her. Her body shimmered, bending light around her as she began to move again. No longer killing, but creating. From her gestures rose a vision, a city of light, pure and uncorrupted, shining like the world before the fall. Its towers were flawless, its people radiant. Then, as the illusion grew brighter, shadows bled into its heart. The perfection fractured, screams echoed. The city collapsed into itself, leaving only fire. When it ended, she turned back to him. That is our prayer, she said, to remember beauty and destroy it before it destroys us. He bowed his head. Then you still know fear. Fear, she whispered, is our salvation. He turned to leave, the crystal pulsing faintly in his hand. Her voice followed him as he ascended the steps. Tell me, ghost, if you still remember, what do you intend to do with what you know? He paused at the threshold and looked back. To teach others how to remember without dying of it. Her smile was unreadable. Then you will fail, as all teachers do, but perhaps your failure will be beautiful. He left her behind, her laughter echoing like music in the corridors. The city breathed again, vast, cruel, alive. Somewhere above, beyond the towers and chasms, the pulse of the warp trembled faintly, sensing the flicker of something it could neither consume nor comprehend. And in the heart of Commorragh, where darkness had learned the shape of grace, the balance began to stir. The wind above the spires trembled with the hum of portals opening and closing, the breath of a city that never slept. Lirin stood at the edge of a bridge overlooking the endless gulf, the crystal in his hand now dim and silent. For days, or what passed for days in this place without sun, he had wandered the arteries of Commorragh, listening, learning. The pulse of the city had become his heartbeat, yet within its rhythm he had begun to sense something new, a fracture, faint but spreading. He watched as a skimmer glided beneath him, leaving a trail of blue fire that curled like smoke. Warriors stood aboard it, laughing, their armor carved with runes of dominance and grace. Their joy was not joy, it was defiance. Every sound in this city was a weapon against silence. But somewhere, deep beneath the echo, a different tone had begun to whisper. Not the hunger of she who thirsts, but something quieter, older. The memory of stillness trying to return. He turned from the bridge and made his way into the lower halls, guided by instinct more than thought. The corridors curved and twisted, each step taking him deeper into the bones of the city, where light itself seemed hesitant to intrude. At the end of a narrow stair, he found a door marked with sigils of negation. Wards, meant to keep gods from hearing. He pressed his hand against it. The ward shuddered, then yielded. Inside was a chamber filled with faint blue mist. A circle of figures sat within it, Drukhari, but unarmed, their armor cast aside. They sat in silence, eyes closed, their minds linked by something unseen. Liren felt it immediately, not worship, not pleasure, but meditation. In this place of screams, they had created a pocket of quiet. A voice entered his thoughts. "You are not one of us, yet you carry our scent." He stepped forward. "I carry your origin," he said aloud. The nearest figure opened his eyes. His face was lined with age, his features too calm for this world. "Then you are the echo we were promised." Liren frowned. "Promised?" The Drukhari inclined his head. There were whispers that when the thirst began to wane, an ancient one would walk among us, not to save, but to remind. We did not believe. Yet, here you are. The others stirred, their eyes gleaming like distant stars. Liren felt their minds brush against his, testing, searching. There was no malice in their touch, only curiosity. "What is this place?" he asked. "A sanctuary," the elder said. "We call it the Circle of Still Flesh. We gather here to remember what pain once was, not as pleasure, not as offering, but as warning. We seek the balance your kind abandoned." Liren looked around the chamber. The walls pulsed faintly, alive with restrained energy. The air was heavy, but not oppressive. It felt like the moments before prayer, when silence has meaning. "You risk much," he said. "If the Cabals discover this—" "They will," the elder said. "In time, all things are found, but perhaps not before the seed is planted." Liren knelt before him. "What seed?" "The one you carry." The elder pointed to the crystal in Liren's hand. Its surface flickered weakly, as if hearing the word. "It is not a weapon. It is remembrance made whole. Through it, we may teach our kind to feel without feeding, to live without drowning, but only if you are willing." He stared at the crystal. It had been silent since Asfereth gave it to him. Now it pulsed with faint rhythm, each flash echoing the beat of his heart. "If I give it to you," he said slowly, "it may awaken the god's gaze." The elder smiled faintly. "Then we will finally be seen for what we are, the flaw that endures." Liren hesitated. The memory of the fall burned behind his eyes. Cities collapsing, stars consumed, laughter turning to screams. He remembered the vow he had made, to remember without dying of it. This, he realized, was that vow made flesh. The risk no longer mattered. He placed the crystal in the elder's hands. The chamber brightened. The air filled with a sound like distant rain. Soft, infinite. The Drukhari closed their eyes, and the light passed through them, weaving their minds together. For a brief moment, Liren saw what they saw. A future where agony no longer chained them, where survival did not require cruelty. It was fragile, fleeting, but it existed. When the light faded, the elder looked up. "It begins," he whispered, "but it will take ages to bloom, perhaps long after this city has devoured itself." "Then it will be worth it," Liren said. He rose to leave but paused at the doorway. The elder's voice reached him one last time. "Tell the god, if she listens, that her feast is ending." Liren stepped into the corridor, the mist closing behind him. Above, the city roared with its endless theatre of death, unaware that in its deepest shadows, something quiet had begun to breathe. The crystal's absence felt strange in his hand, like the loss of a heartbeat, yet also like release. He looked once more toward the heart of Comera, where screams turned to song and whispered, "Let the silence remember us." And for the first time, the city did not answer. Commorragh trembled, not with war nor with chaos, but with something quieter, more dangerous, reflection. In his deepest arteries, the echo of Lyrin's gift spread like a breath beneath still water. No one saw it, no one could. Yet whispers began to change. The cabals, once obsessed with spectacle, found moments of hesitation in the midst of slaughter. The witch arenas faltered mid-performance, as if their participants suddenly remembered the faces of those they flayed. Even the homunculi, in their frozen laboratories of horror, paused to listen to the strange silence blooming between screams. Something was shifting, and the god they defied turned her gaze toward the tremor that should not have existed. Lyrin walked the streets as the transformation began, unseen but not absent. The air was heavy, the colors sharper, the laughter slower. He could feel the balance stirring, fragile, new, like a pulse returning to a long dead heart. The elder's words haunted him. It begins. Yet he also knew beginnings were the most fragile form of hope. Commorragh had been built on the bones of eternity, and eternity did not yield easily. A storm of violet light rippled through the sky. Portals flared open across the spires, casting long shadows. From them descended the Sybarites and Archons, their armor gleaming, their banners woven from agony and pride. Rumors had spread of a cult in the lower tiers preaching restraint, of warriors refusing to feed on the souls of the weak. Heresy, betrayal, madness. The rulers of the city moved to extinguish it before it became contagion. Lyrin followed their descent from afar, his cloak drawn close. The streets filled with loyalists, their voices chanting ancient hymns of indulgence. Yet within the crowd he felt others, silent ones, whose eyes glimmered faintly with understanding. They met his gaze without fear. The circle's influence had already spread further than any of them had imagined. The seed had taken root in the most impossible soil. He reached the threshold of the lower chambers just as the first assault began. Blades of light tore through the air, and the screams that followed were not ritualized. They were real. The cabals unleashed their fury, flooding the sanctuaries with fire and psychic energy. Lyrin felt each death like a pulse through the webway itself. The god's laughter stirred faintly across reality, hungry and curious. He pushed deeper, through smoke and ruin, until he reached the chamber of the circle. It was no longer blue and quiet. It burned white, a radiance drawn not from the warp but from something older, something inward. The surviving Drukhari sat within it, unarmed, unmoving. The elder stood at the center, the crystal in his palms now a sphere of pure light. "They are coming," Lyrin said. "I know," the elder replied. His voice was calm, though the walls shook with the weight of approaching violence. "But it does not matter. They cannot kill what we have already set free." Lyrin stepped forward. "You can still escape. There are paths within the webway." The elder shook his head. "Escape is for those who wish to live. We have already become what we sought. Look." The light from the crystal expanded, touching the nearest Drukhari. As it did, their form dissolved into mist, then into nothing, leaving behind only stillness. Not death, but absence. He realized what they were doing, unbinding themselves, returning to the state before desire, before sin. The god could not touch what did not hunger. The walls cracked open. Warriors poured in, their eyes wild with devotion and fear. The first to reach the circle hesitated as the light touched him. His weapon fell from his grasp. For an instant, he seemed a child again, his armor melting away in illusion, revealing a face full of wonder. Then he, too, was gone. The others faltered, their fury melting into confusion. Some screamed and turned their blades upon the light, only to vanish in its glow. The chamber became a storm of disappearance, violence devoured by stillness. Liren stood at its heart, unmoving, as the last fragments of the circle faded into radiance. When the light finally dimmed, only he remained. The crystal lay at his feet, dim now, its energy spent. The chamber was empty, silent, unscarred, as if nothing had ever existed within it. Above, the city continued its cacophony, unaware that its foundations had shifted. The god's presence recoiled faintly in the warp, puzzled, denied. He picked up the crystal. It was cold now, inert. Yet he felt within it the echo of what had transpired, a thread of balance woven into the city's endless cycle of cruelty. The circle was gone, but its memory had not perished. It lived in those who had seen, those who had hesitated before striking, those who had tasted a silence they could not name. He climbed back into the upper tiers. The towers loomed as before, perfect and merciless, yet something unseen lingered beneath their glow. The wind carried a faint hum, not song, not scream, but something between. At the highest balcony of Komorra, he looked toward the crimson void that served as sky. The god was there, distant yet watching, her hunger endless. But she did not speak. For the first time in an age, she waited. Liren whispered into the wind, his voice barely more than breath. "We are not cured, but we are not yours." The city did not answer. It simply breathed, alive, defiant, imperfect. And far beneath its spires, where silence had been born, the faintest pulse of light began again. The city was changing, though few understood it. Beneath its shining towers and its cathedrals of torment, a pulse now moved, faint, irregular, alive. It was not rebellion, not yet, but remembrance. The air felt heavier, charged with thought. The screams in the arenas no longer carried the same rhythm. They faltered, uncertain, as though each cry carried an echo of doubt. And in that hesitation, something sacred was returning. Choice. Liren walked among them unseen, the ghost of a prophecy already fading into myth. He could feel the fractures widening between the cabals, whispers of vanished soldiers, of light devouring those who sought to destroy it. The silence he had planted was spreading like contagion. It did not roar or proclaim itself. It simply waited. Patience was its weapon. From the highest tower of Komorra, he watched the city ripple beneath the blood-red horizon. The void ships drifted in and out of the webway like veins pumping dark lifeblood into the eternal heart of the Empire. But now, in the spaces between those pulses, stillness gathered. It was fragile, easily broken, but it was there. Even the god in the warp, vast and sleepless, had felt it. Her hunger pressed closer to the barrier, confused by the taste of souls she could no longer reach. A whisper reached him, not through sound, but through thought. It was the woman of silver eyes, the one who had first named him Ghost. Her presence brushed against his mind like wind through shattered glass. "You've changed something," she said. "They don't know it yet, but they will." He closed his eyes. "They will resist. They must. Resistance is the proof of life. You've given them that." Her voice faded, but her memory lingered. The fire of defiance in her eyes, the edge of understanding that made her both predator and priest. He wondered if she was still alive, or if she, too, had been taken by the quiet. In Komorra, survival and transcendence were almost the same thing. He descended from the tower, drawn toward the lower spires where the first changes had begun. The streets shimmered with rain that wasn't rain. liquid light, bleeding from the fabric of the webway. The god was restless. Her touch rippled through reality, seeking to reclaim what had slipped away. The Drukhari called it the Thirst's Return, believing it punishment for forgotten rituals. But Lirin knew better. It was fear. The god feared starvation. He passed through a plaza where artists sculpted agony into air. Their creations hung suspended, visions of captured pain that pulsed with colour. Yet one artist stood apart, his hands trembling. His work, a figure of light caught between birth and death, refused to hold its form. Each time he shaped it, it fell back into stillness. When he saw Liren, he bowed instinctively, though he did not know why. "It will not stay," the artist whispered. "It does not want to be seen." "Then let it hide," Liren said. "Even silence has its beauty." The artist stared at him, eyes wide with something close to recognition. "You sound like the ones who vanished." Liren did not answer. He continued walking until the streets gave way to shadow. There, at the city's forgotten edge, he found the remnants of the circle's chamber. It had been sealed by the Archons, its existence erased from official record. But no seal could close against memory. The air still carried traces of that day, the faint hum of balance, the whisper of the unbound. He knelt, touching the cold floor. Beneath the stone, he felt movement, a slow, rhythmic vibration, as though the city itself were breathing in its sleep. "You feel it too," said a voice behind him. He turned. It was the silver-eyed woman, alive, her armor darkened by battle. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "The elders whisper your name now, though none admit it aloud. They say you've cursed us. Do you believe that?" She tilted her head. "No, I think you've reminded us that curses can be chosen." He smiled faintly. "Then the lesson remains." "It does more than remain." She knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Something is growing here. The homunculi whisper of changes they cannot undo. Souls they take no longer taste of despair. Some even dream before they die. They say it's spreading through the webway itself, through the tunnels, the gates, even the ships." "Balance does not stay still," he said softly. "It finds its own shape." She looked at him sharply. "And when the god finds it?" "Then she will see herself," he answered. "And gods rarely survive their own reflection." Lightning flashed across the blood-red sky, illuminating the towers above. The ground beneath them shuddered, a tremor that passed through the city like a sigh. For an instant, the sound of screams ceased. The lights dimmed. The silence that followed was vast, absolute. Liren and the woman stood within it, motionless. Then the noise returned, softer, less certain. The moment had passed, but something had shifted forever. The god had heard her reflection and recoiled. The woman exhaled. "If this is the beginning of her end, it will be a long one." "Endings are always long," he said, "but they begin in whispers." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both the city and the void beyond it. "Then whisper louder, ghost." He smiled, not with triumph, but with the calm of one who has seen eternity unravel and begin again. "No," he said. "Now it is their turn." And as the red light washed over the towers, Lirin stepped back into the shadows, leaving behind a city that no longer knew whether it was damned or awakening. The warp trembled. Beyond the veil, in the black between stars, the god stirred, not with hunger, but confusion. For the first time since her birth, her feast had soured. The flavour of the Drukhari souls, once sweet with despair and indulgence, now carried the faint aftertaste of serenity. It was poison to her, unfamiliar and unbearable. She reached out through the webway, seeking the source, and her touch faltered. The labyrinth that had once belonged to her prey now resisted, its corridors whispering silence instead of fear. Something had begun that even divinity could not fully command. In Comorar, storms formed within the void sky. Crimson clouds gathered where there should have been none. Portals flickered, misaligned, and the city shuddered as though caught between two breaths. The Archons called it a sign of divine displeasure, but Lyrain knew better. It was the echo of equilibrium, the reaction of a cosmos unaccustomed to peace. The god's unease had become the city's reflection. He walked through the streets as riots flared and faded like sparks. Some cabals turned inward, seeking new excess to drown the creeping quiet. Others embraced the silence, forming hidden cults that preached stillness as weapon, restraint as rebellion. The god's worship had fractured. Fear and faith no longer marched together. Lyrain found himself drawn once again to the woman with silver eyes. She met him beneath a bridge of glass that overlooked the river of light cutting through the lower tiers. The water pulsed like veins through an ancient corpse, its glow shifting between gold and violet. Around them, the noise of the city had dulled to a low murmur. "It's spreading faster than even Asfereth could have imagined," she said. "The cabals are dividing, the homunculi whisper of dead gods, and the witch cults are beginning to starve on their own pleasures. What did you give them, Lyrain?" "Memory," he said, "of what they were before the fall, of what we might still become." She studied him carefully. "And what do you become when the silence reaches you?" He didn't answer at first. He watched the river below, its reflection breaking across his face. "Perhaps nothing," he said finally. "Perhaps that is the point." Her gaze softened. "You sound like a god yourself." "I sound like what remains when one stops needing them." Above them, thunder rolled without storm. The sky cracked open, revealing threads of violet lightning that struck the towers in silence. No sound, no fire, just light. The people below screamed, yet no harm came. The air vibrated instead, filled with the hum of unseen change. Lyrain felt it in his bones. The god was looking directly at him now. He closed his eyes and saw her, a vast form of impossible beauty, every pleasure and agony ever conceived made flesh. Her voice filled his mind, soft as ruin. "You have undone my perfection. I have reminded your children of it," he whispered. "They are mine. They were yours. Now they remember choice." The god's laughter echoed through the warp, endless and hollow. "You think silence can kill hunger. You think denial can outlast desire. I am eternity. They will return to me, as all things do." He opened his eyes. The woman was watching him, though she could not hear the words that had passed between worlds. The light in the sky dimmed, leaving the faint outline of something enormous fading beyond the veil. "She knows," he said quietly. "Then we have little time." "No," he replied. "We have exactly as much as we need." They began walking together through the streets. Around them, the air shimmered as portals cracked open and closed at random. Fragments of the webway bled into the city, spilling visions of other realms, dying stars, ancient ruins, worlds untouched by the god's shadow. The Drukhari stumbled through these apparitions, seeing for the first time the breadth of creation beyond their cage. One of them, a young warrior drenched in blood, dropped his weapon as Lyrain passed. "What is this?" he whispered. "Why do I feel calm?" "Because you remember," Lyrain said, "and remembrance is freedom." The warrior fell to his knees, trembling. Others began to follow, uncertain whether in awe or confusion. The woman's hand brushed Lyrin's shoulder. "You've turned faith into contagion." "Faith always was," he said. "Now it finally serves life." They reached the plaza at the city's heart, the same amphitheatre where art and agony had once been worshipped as twins. It was empty now, the air thick with the scent of ozone and dust. Liren stepped into the centre, raising his hands. The hum of balance resonated faintly from the crystal shard that hung around his neck, the last fragment of Asfereth's gift. "Listen," he said, and though his voice was quiet, it carried through the city like wind through hollow stone. "The god is not your master. She is your mirror. And she starves because you have remembered what she never could. That desire without peace is slavery." The crowd that had gathered did not cheer, did not shout. They simply listened. In that stillness, something immense shifted across the webway. The laughter of the god ceased. The woman beside him turned her face to the void sky, her eyes reflecting its dim light. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said softly, "she learns what it means to hunger in silence." He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, the storm parted. Above Komorra, where the god's shadow once lingered, there was nothing. Pure, vast, unclaimed. The first true silence since the fall. Lirin smiled, knowing it would not last, knowing it did not need to. Balance was never permanent. It only needed to be remembered. The silence did not last. Nothing ever truly does. Komorra breathed again, slow, unsteady, uncertain, as if the city itself had awoken from a long fever. Its towers no longer gleamed as cruelly as before. Their reflections wavered in the crimson sky, like the memory of violence rather than its continuation. Yet beneath that fragile calm, something vast and wounded stirred. The god was not gone. She was listening. Lirin stood alone atop the highest bridge, the void yawning beneath him. The woman with silver eyes had vanished into rumour, the Eldar into legend, and the circle into myth. What remained was him, the wanderer, the witness, the first who had dared to bring stillness into the heart of hunger. The city's air pressed cold against his face, thick with ozone and the smell of burned metal. He could hear the faint hum of the crystal shard against his chest, though it no longer shone. Its heartbeat had slowed to match his own. Below, life continued. The arenas still burned, though fewer came to watch. The homunculi still harvested pain, though some now paused before their first incision. And in the lower spires, whispers persisted, of light that freed instead of consuming, of souls who vanished without death. Some called it heresy, others called it evolution. He descended the bridge slowly, his mind heavy with the weight of unseen consequence. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat, marking the end of an age. He passed through a district where laughter once filled the air, only to find it replaced by murmured prayer, not to the god, but to silence itself. Candles flickered in alcoves carved from bone, their flames small but steady. One figure knelt before him, a young Drukhari with eyes like ash. She looked up and whispered, "We heard your voice in the storm. We were not unmade." He reached out, touching her shoulder lightly. "You were never meant to be. Only to remember." The girl bowed her head, trembling. "Then teach us what you remember." He smiled faintly, though the expression felt strange on his face. "It isn't something I can teach. It's something you must forget to find." She did not understand, but she would. They all would in time. He turned away, leaving her among the candles. The further he walked, the more the city began to fracture around him. The air quivered with unseen tremors. Portals misfired, spitting sparks of pure warp light across the streets. Some burst open, revealing glimpses of dying stars or oceans made of glass. The god's presence throbbed faintly through each rift. Weaker now, but furious. She had lost her voice to stillness, and silence had become her cage. Lirin reached the edge of the webway gate, the one he had first destroyed and long believed lost. It had reformed itself, though imperfectly, its frame cracked and luminous with fault lines. Through it pulsed the rhythm of both life and unmaking, the twin forces he had spent eons trying to reconcile. He stepped closer, the air vibrating around him like breath against flame. He closed his eyes. "I know you are listening," he thought. The god answered with no words, only feeling. A wave of sorrow and hunger that rolled through his mind like a tide. Beneath it, he felt something unexpected. Fear. "You cannot consume what does not desire," he said softly. "And soon there will be more who do not." The god's essence coiled, flickering between rage and despair. Images flashed before him. The first Eldar cities, their collapse, their revels, their screams. He saw her creation again, the birth of divinity from collective sin, and understood what she truly was. Not punishment, but memory. The echo of their choices given form. "Then we are mirrors," he whispered. "You and I." A pulse of light erupted from the gate, throwing him backward. The ground cracked beneath his feet. The god's final whisper rippled through the air, faint as dying wind. "Mirrors break." He rose slowly, his hand trembling. "And when they do," he said, "they reflect the truth." The gate imploded. Silence rushed in like floodwater, sweeping through the corridors of Comorra. Every light dimmed, every sound ceased. The city froze, not in death, but in pause. For a heartbeat, all existence held its breath. And in that stillness, something passed from Lirin into the world. The balance he had carried, now unbound. He fell to his knees, his body fading into light. The shard at his chest shattered, scattering into dust that glowed like embers caught in eternal twilight. His voice, soft and distant, drifted through the silence he had made. "Remember not me, but the choice." The words lingered long after his form was gone. The silence remained, spreading outward from the broken gate through the towers, the arenas, the shadows, touching every soul in Comorra. It was not peace, it was possibility. Far beyond, in the warp, the god screamed without sound. Her hunger found no echo. Her reflection vanished. And in that void, the faintest pulse began. The birth of something new, neither god nor mortal, forged from the quiet that endures between every act of creation and every fall.